Hello and welcome to the final presentation of my master thesis on evaluating the applicability of gamification to exercises based on the quadruped stand. Let's start by making clear what exercises based on the quadruped stand actually are. Basically, they're exercises that start from a pose where both hands and legs support the upper body as shown in the top left. From this starting pose, many different movements can be made to train various parts of the body. The alternating arm and leg extension is one of the most common variations. Next, let's talk about gamification. In general, gamification is a tool for adding incentives to perform activities. In the case of indoor exercises, we have an activity that can easily become boring and repetitive. Progress and benefits aren't immediately visible, so it's easy to lose interest. With gamification, we can make the activity more exciting and add reasons to exercise. So, how could we gamify quadruped exercises? First, there's the lazy approach. We could count exercise repetitions and have that feed into score-powered game elements such as goals, achievements, and leaderboards. For outdoor travel activities, this makes perfect sense. There, gamification shouldn't distract too much from the task of navigating the real world. Indoors, however, there's not really anything to distract from. So in this scenario, it makes more sense to actively engage the user, which brings me to the next approach. Again, we could count exercise repetitions, but this time use it for a real-time interactive game. The problem with this approach is that counting is a rather limited form of input. It's not ideal for making exciting games that will keep players coming back for months. That's not to say it's impossible. In the battle system of Nintendo's exercise game, Ring Fit Adventure, variety stems from choosing different exercises for different in-game effects. Effects are then activated through exercise repetition counting. For encouraging exercising in general, the system works. However, the reliance on having a choice makes it less ideal when one wants to perform very specific exercises. A more complex input system designed around each exercise should make it possible to create compelling exercise-specific games. Such games could then keep individual exercises engaging over time. A likely reason why this approach isn't so popular is that it would require investing more time and effort into each exercise one wishes to support. It's not as cost-effective as the generalized approach and serves more niche use cases. Despite that, this thesis aimed to explore how games could be built around quadruped exercises. These provide some interesting input and output related challenges. So, what kind of requirements do we need to fulfill to make an effective quadruped exercise game? Let's start off with requirements for the input system. Any game will require that inputs drive game actions, otherwise it wouldn't be much of a game. In exercise games, those inputs should result from exercise-related movements. For our exercise-specific game, it would be nice for there to be some relation between the real-world movements performed and the in-game actions caused. So, for our quadruped exercise game, we'll need to find a way to measure a decent number of exercise-related movements accurately and reliably. Game outputs are a little more simple. In any game, the player must receive feedback. The challenge with meeting this requirement in a quadruped exercise game is that the player will be looking towards the floor. Their head will also only be an arm's length off the ground. Therefore, we'll need to find ways to deliver feedback for this head placement. Hardware used will have additional general requirements. To reach a wide audience, it would be good if hardware was affordable and easy to use. On the other hand, powerful and feature-rich hardware would ease development. Movement-controlled games may come with additional requirements. For example, any worn tracking hardware should be comfortable. All this is to say that there isn't going to be a perfect solution. Compromises will have to be made. On the software side, games should naturally offer engaging moment-to-moment gameplay. If the game isn't fun or interesting to play, even for just a few minutes, then what's the point? For most exercise games, engagement should additionally last more than just a few minutes. We want people to come back to both the game and the exercise after all. And finally, it goes without saying that exercise games should not be detrimental to the activity they're trying to motivate people for. Ideally, they should encourage performing good exercise. So, let's tackle the first stage necessary for making a quadruped exercise game, finding suitable hardware, starting with input devices. Let's look at what could be measured. For the most part, it'll be the states of body parts that can move during the exercise. Beyond that, we could also detect interactions between body parts. In this example, the elbow and knee could be brought together below the torso to trigger some in-game event. It should be noted that most potential input devices won't be able to track everything at once, nor are all movements equally controllable and measurable. Fortunately, a complete set of measurements isn't necessary. A subset should be more than enough for many game concepts. Starting off a list of potentially useful hardware, we have inertial measurement units, or IMUs for short. They're cheap and found in almost any portable device these days. Strap an IMU containing device to any body part and we can measure its acceleration, angular velocity, and possibly also orientation. Downsides of IMUs include that they must be worn, which comes with comfort concerns. You'll also need to wear one IMU per tracked body part, so scalability isn't great. The functionality of IMUs can be expanded with room-scale position tracking through camera-tracked devices such as VR controllers and trackers. However, these devices come with the downside of increased cost and size, and are often designed to be held, not worn. Another option is extracting the user's skeleton pose from camera images. Many measurements can be made when we have a full or even just partial skeleton. Using a stationary camera means that there's no need to wear anything, which in turn maximizes comfort and decreases setup times. Downsides include limited accuracy and responsiveness. For quadruped exercises, it'll also be difficult to find a camera angle where all body parts will be visible at all times. While simple webcams can deliver passable results for tracking, more purpose-built hardware with depth sensing capabilities isn't as common or affordable. Finally, pressure pads are an inexpensive solution for measuring ground interactions. The issue here is that exercise-related functionality is limited and ownership is low. Still, limited functionality can be compensated for by combining input devices. Just keep in mind that downsides like cost, comfort, or setup time will add up. Next, let's talk about output devices. An obvious starting point would be the displays found in anything from a smartwatch to a TV. Problem is, people performing quadruped exercises will be looking towards the ground. The taller, further away, and higher up a screen is, the more difficult it becomes to look at. For smaller displays, we'll also need to consider readability and immersion. At the same time, displays should always be placed far enough away to not obstruct arm movements. As the drawing should show, this basically leaves us with phones, tablets, and laptops as our options. Viewability and immersion can be improved with head-mounted displays. Unfortunately, the downsides may make such headsets hard to justify. They are not comfortable to wear during exercises, could cause motion sickness, and are often prohibitively expensive. For supplementary feedback, sound through speakers or headphones should be easy to implement. While not very useful on its own, it can still be an effective tool for enhancing the user experience and influencing mood. Similarly, haptic feedback devices can also improve the experience. Exact benefits and downsides will vary depending on the device being talked about. Up to this point, everything has been quite theoretical. The next stage of this project was to take a promising looking hardware configuration, build a game for it, and evaluate it in a user study. If successful, this should answer the question of whether quadruped exercise games are viable. First, the choice of hardware. A tablet using webcam-based tracking seems like an ideal choice. The user experience should be trivially easy. Just place a tablet on the ground, open an app, and start exercising. Skeleton tracking gives games plenty of opportunities to measure inputs, and tablets are a reasonably widespread platform. To ease development and test additional camera systems like the Kinect, this tablet setup was approximated using a laptop and external camera sensors. For the game's design, a quick reminder of our goals. We want engaging moment-to-moment gameplay, long-term motivation, and good exercise. To tackle all that, I created an on-rails shooter called Portal Plunge. In the game, players fly a spaceship along a fixed path while performing various actions. The guided nature of the game grants a lot of control over the exercise being encouraged. Firing at targets is the main exercise-related action in the game. As is expected in the alternating arm and leg extension exercise, players raise their arm to aim and lock onto targets to their left or right. To fire, they simply need to move their raised hand outwards from below their chest, like throwing a ball. In between firing at targets, players can tilt their upper body left, right, or down to offset the spaceship's position from the main path. This allows them to evade obstacles, collect various items, and choose between paths. To make the game more exciting, the plan was to include puzzle elements. A challenge during development was that the limited accuracy of camera tracking necessitated aiming inputs to be simplified into just a left or right decision. In order to still allow players to aim at different targets in the environment, a weapon selection system was added. To lock onto targets, players need to select a color-matching weapon by holding their raised hand to their forehead. In addition to the puzzle elements, a key to making the game fun is the extensive feedback players receive for each action they perform. What are just boring and repetitive movements in the real world are amplified into exciting, varied and consequential in-game actions, highlighted in these images. Another challenge when creating games for regular exercise is having enough content to last. While procedural generation would be an option, creating meaningful content with such systems is challenging. So instead, Portal Plunge uses a system where content is split into small, reusable building blocks. Scenes contain paths made up of path segments, which can each feature a selection of challenges as the player travels along them. Levels can then be assembled from scenes that the player switches between via portals. Each scene can have some unique path and challenge configuration. Basically what this means is that every time a piece of content is added to the game, that content can appear in a variety of contexts. As content is added, the number of levels that can quickly be assembled increases almost exponentially. Now, it's time to see if all this actually achieved previously listed goals. To do this, a user study was conducted to answer following questions. Is the chosen setup comfortable to use? How do Kinect and webcam-based tracking compare? What kind of exercise did the game encourage? Was it engaging to play? And did participants of the study see potential for the game to have lasting appeal? 16 people participated, most of whom occasionally played video games but regularly took time to exercise. Here's how the study was conducted. First, participants started filling out a survey with personal information. Then they played 2 levels from the game, teaching the basic mechanics. Half played using a webcam, the other half with Kinect. After completing the first 2 levels, participants returned to the survey to rate the game's control scheme and the camera system they had just used. Following this, participants switched camera system and played another 2 levels. To offer a point of comparison, the 3rd level featured similar gameplay to the 2nd. The 4th level showed off more experimental mechanics using the weapon switching system. This was intended to show how the game could be expanded. Finally, participants returned to the survey to once again rate the camera system they had just used and fill out questions related to comfort and the game concept. Overall, 15 to 20 minutes were spent playing the game and 15 minutes filling out the survey. While playing, the game naturally kept track of a bunch of performance-related data, such as the input actions made and their success rates in the context of the game. Let's look at the results from all of this data. In terms of comfort, participants found looking at a laptop ahead of them to be somewhat strenuous. Fortunately, while this confirms that the display position isn't ideal, the following charts at least seem to indicate that it's an acceptable compromise. Neck pain caused by looking at the screen still seemed to be less severe than any wrist pain inherent to the exercise. And in terms of session length, over 80% stated they could see themselves playing games in this pose for at least 10 to 15 minutes. Over half even extended that to 15 to 20 minutes. Having people willingly put up with longer session lengths is important, because this type of gamification tends to make exercising less time efficient. What this chart should show is that in a typical level, we could expect people to spend around 55% of the time performing movement or aiming actions. Roughly 30% of the time will be spent performing actions with an arm raised. Looking at the number of actions initiated per minute, we see that arms are raised roughly 4 to 5 times per minute in the 2nd and 3rd level. With all this, we can get a rough idea of how much exercise people would be doing in a typical session. For the majority of players, this would mean spending about 5 to 8 minutes actively doing something. 3 to 5 minutes would be spent doing the arm and leg extension. Action count-wise, a 10 to 15 minute session should lead to about 135 to 200 actions being performed, with around 45 to 65 being arm and leg extension actions. These actions are typically held for about 4 seconds. For people willing to play longer, all numbers naturally increase. So, how does this compare to suggestions for ungamified exercise? While exact recommendations here vary, some common things said are that one should spend around 5 minutes performing these exercises, hold each repetition for somewhere between 5 and 20 seconds, and perform about 20 to 60 repetitions. The durations for which players held extension movements seem to have been a bit on the short side, but overall the results from the study seem roughly in line with these recommendations. Another concern was exercise balance. Ideally, each directional movement should be mirrored. On this slide, the imbalance of actions is visualized on a scale from 0 to 1, where 0 is perfectly balanced and 1 is completely one-sided. The first 3 levels were tuned to have a similar number of left and right actions, and show similar results. On average, for every 10 seconds of action performance, around 1 to 2 seconds favored one side. Similarly, for every 10 actions performed, one side performed 1 to 2 actions more than the other. The 4th level, intended to show off game features, did not receive balanced tuning, and that's reflected in the data. It was quite unbalanced. What's also worth mentioning is that balance improved the longer the game was played. If we look at time spent in the first 3 levels as a whole, balance across playing these levels was better than in any individual level. Next, let's look at how the Kinect and webcam-based tracking compared. These are the average results people gave to tracking-related questions after the first and last 2 levels. Keep in mind that people switched camera system in between. We can see that the Kinect in blue generally scored higher in almost every category. Webcam tracking fared especially poorly with the downward movement gesture and the weapon switch gesture in the final level. Downward movement was not sensitive enough with the webcam, which should be easy to fix. Weapon switching largely struggled due to the webcam's lack of depth sensing. It frequently failed to distinguish an arm stretched out to aim with a hand placed on the forehead. This likely caused a lot of frustration in the final level, which is why I presume ratings for reliability, aiming, and overall satisfaction drop so heavily between the 2 sets of levels. The reasoning for this explanation can be seen in the data gathered by the game. Success rates with the webcam drop significantly in the final level compared to Kinect. For any firing actions, even the best webcam player could only achieve 80% of the success of the best Kinect player. However, it's possible that with more refinement or alternative gestures, webcam-based input could be improved. In terms of general ratings for the game, people found the concept quite understandable, the game's tutorials helpful, and the difficulty a little on the easy side. Overall, the game received positive feedback. Long-term appeal for the game could only be estimated, but most people thought the game made performing quadruped exercises more fun. Many also reported that they could see themselves being more motivated towards regularly performing quadruped exercises with a more content-rich implementation of the game concept. In conclusion, building complex games for quadruped exercises is definitely possible. With a little more refinement, a game like Portal Plunge should easily be playable with just the tablet. Input-related issues could likely have been resolved with more opportunities for user testing. And based on the feedback received, people seem interested in further research and development into exercise-specific games.